Sikhri connects people with the teachings of Sikhi and strengthens the bond of the Sikh community around the world by offering courses and seminars in a variety of mediums. Sikhri has published a number of books: Thank You Vaheguru, Guru Granth Sahib, Its Language and Grammar, Sikh Faith and Followers, and My Gurmukhi Khajana, and our most recent one, Love Harp. All Sikhri products are available for sale on sikhri.org, or they can be ordered on our Facebook page. Sikhri also has a podcast that is available at sikhcast.podbean.com. Please subscribe to the post and stay connected. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Nadhra Khan. Dr. Nadhra Khan is an assistant professor at Art History at Lahore University of Management Sciences, Lahore, Pakistan. She also specializes in the history of art and architectural ornament of 19th century Punjab, but her research and teaching interests also cover the earlier Mughal and later colonial visual culture of this region. She has held many prestigious research fellowships at SOAS, London, Paris, Princeton, and Oxford. She's currently working with the Aga Khan Cultural Service, Pakistan, as a consultant historian for their Lahore Fort Picture Wall project. Her monograph, entitled Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Samadhi, Understanding the Sikh Architectural Ornament, will appear in 2017. Now, without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Nadhra Khan to begin today's presentation. So it's on to you, Dr. Nadhra Khan.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Vineet. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's present here in any part of the world they may be. As you must have read the abstract, today's talk is about Maharaja's secular policies and a little insight into his private life. And I'll basically be talking about his wife, Gul Begum, who was given a title Gulbahar Begum. And I'll before I begin, I would like to say that the information I'm using for today's talk has been gleaned from the Maharaja's court chronicles in Persian, known as Umdatut Tawarikh by Lala Sohan Lal Suri. And this spans his entire rule. I've also consulted a short history the Maharaja commissioned, which is titled Zafarnama-e Ranjit Singh by Diwan Amarnath Akhari, who was the son of Diwan Dinanath, the head of the finance department of the Lahore Darbar, and also accounts of Europeans visiting the Maharaja's court, also serving him in different capacities. But I will begin with a Lahore Darbar document in the Lahore Museum. All of these provide evidence of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's policies of religious non-discrimination and magnanimity in official circles and his private life. And it is mostly his private life that we will be discussing today. The Maharaja rose to power at the young age of 18 and successfully ruled the Punjab for 40 years, from 1799 to 1839, leaving behind a legacy of religious tolerance. While most incidents of the Maharaja's fairness are recorded as anecdotes, some can be corroborated by historical documents. One such example is a court order now preserved in the Lahore Museum collection. And this was issued to Khalifa Nuruddin, the governor of Lahore, on the 31st of Bhadon, Vikram Samvat 1884, that is equivalent to 1827 CE. Originally in Persian and translated in Urdu by the museum officials, and I've sort of translated it into English, it very clearly states that no official should be allowed to deal with people maliciously or cruelly. And it goes to the extent of stating that even if the Maharaja himself is caught up in such an act, he should be plainly asked to reconsider the matter and to forgive the offender. In an attempt to enforce law and order, the governor is directed by the Maharaja to accord justice to each religious group according to its holy book, the Shastras or the Quran, and that any fines and disobedience be punished. So, true to his unprejudiced nature, Ranjit Singh's harem was composed of women of different religions, Sikh, Hindu, and Muslims. The ones he married by circumambulation or formally, according to Hari Ram Gupta, a renowned 20th century historian, were only 20. John Logan, who was appointed as the British governor of the Lahore Fort after Punjab's annexation in 1849, and who was also in charge of the Leap Singh, with additional charges of the pension paymaster to all pensioners, wrote in a letter to his wife on 10th June 1849 that there were 22 surviving widows of Ranjit Singh, out of which 17 were Hindu and 5 Muslim. Through his records, we also find that the Maharaja is known to have wanted a European wife and requested the British authorities to help him get one, but never succeeded. So going back to his Muslim wives, the two well-known Muslim women he married were both dancing girls. Mora in 1802 and Gul Begum in 1832. Both were elevated to the status of queens and, most importantly, were never asked to convert. They are both known to have commissioned mosques. Mora's mosque still stands near the Papar Mandi in Lahore, while Gul Begum's mosque cannot be identified with certainty. The Maharaja is known to have struck a coin in the name of Mora, his first Muslim wife, and openly admitting his deep love for her to his courtiers, and Sohan Lal Suri records this, after he witnessed the affection displayed by Lord William Bentinck, the Governor-General of India, and his wife during the Roper meeting in 1831. The Maharaja married the second Muslim wife with great pomp and show. While Mora, according to Princeton, who is the author of Origin of the Sikh Power in the Punjab, published in 1834, was discarded and sent to Pathankot in August 1811, Gul Begum survived the Maharaja and received the highest amount of annual pension, rupees 12,380 among his widows, from the British government after annexation. And this is the information that we get in the parliamentary papers published in 1864. Eyewitness accounts of the Maharaja and Gul Begum's wedding ceremony appear in at least 3 sources: Umdat Tawarikh, Zafarnama Ranjit Singh, and John Martin Honigberger, who was a doctor and pharmacist serving the Maharaja and the author of 35 Years in the East. The first 2 sources I just mentioned give interesting and vivid details of the Maharaja's eagerness to marry her. According to Amarnath, the Maharaja's eyes caught sight of a dancer named Gulbahar during celebrations, where countless beautiful girls belonging to different areas were dancing. Love-struck, the Maharaja conveyed his feelings through a person named Sattar, who was in charge of the dancing troupe. Gul Begum, unaffected by the Maharaja's special attention, is reported to have cross-examined the messenger. To express the Maharaja's love-sick state, Amarnath quotes Faizi, who was Emperor Akbar's court poet, his verses from Nalo Daman, and this is again a very interesting text which was originally in an Indian love poem. The court laureate translated at the wish of Emperor Akbar from Sanskrit into Persian in the meter of Laila o Majnu. So Amarnath Akbari also tells us that Gul Begum, who initially paid no heed to the Maharaja's feelings, gradually fell in love with him, and Ranjit Singh subsequently gave her the title of Gul Begum. But Suri actually tells us that she was given the title of Gulbahar Begum. So there is this, two different versions of it. And the Maharaja elevated her status above the rest of the women of the harem, appointing beautiful maids in her service. Now I will give you a little description of the wedding itself. So shortly before the wedding day, which was the 27th of September 1832, an order was issued to Kharak Singh, informing him of the Maharaja's plans and inviting him to join the celebrations. His men were asked to leave for Lahore to bring, and I quote, bring brocade tents with poles, expensive and well-wrought canopies, and happy tents, so that all the requisites of the happy gathering be well served at Amritsar, end quote. Describing the Maharaja's excitement, Suri states that all traditional wedding practices were followed, including the offering of tambol by the relatives and important courtiers. The Maharaja, interestingly, even painted his hand with henna that was covered with a glove by the priests as a sign of censure when he visited the Golden Temple next day to offer his ardas. He also had to offer 525 rupees as nazar to Bhai Gobind Ramji as means of atonement, and as a sign of their pardon of his, and I quote, his sins and mistakes, end quote. The Bhai Sahibs granted the Maharaja some garments, including a doshala or shawl, a piece of brocade, and a piece of red silk as a sacred token from the Sad Sangat, similar to the tradition of granting a robe of honor. Sohanlal Suri also tells us that about the third quarter of the day of the wedding, the Maharaja put on saffron garments and jewelry and ordered special carpets to be spread out in the silver bungalow. And this silver bungalow, if we have time in the question-answer session, I'll explain what it looked like and what happened to it after annexation. So the silver bungalow was used for the ceremonies, and tents and canopies were set up all around it. All the dancing girls of Amritsar and Lahore were required to be present in the silver bungalow, which was decorated with large and small bunches of flowers. The ceremony started with the drum beaters and musicians playing music, while the skies were lit up with a fantastic display of fireworks. Raja Dhyan Singh, the Prime Minister, was asked to restrict entry to the silver bungalow and not let any of the sardars or servants enter it. And now we have description of Gul Begum, who wore a yellow dress, as the Maharaja had also worn a saffron dress, and bedecked with gold ornaments from head to toe, with her hands and feet also decorated with henna, entered the bungalow and was shortly thereafter joined by the Maharaja, and they both sat in chairs next to each other. And now I will read a small paragraph from Umdatut Tawarikh, and I quote, "Garlands of roses interwoven with pearls were tied around the forehead of the Maharaja, and a gold nose ring with a pearl was fixed in the nose of Gul Begum, and lovely words of congratulations filled the heart of the audience with pleasure. Fireworks began to play, and the Maharaja indulged in drinking wine. When the night had passed 1/4, they went to Rambagh, or his summer palace, and Gul Begum was given the name of Gulbahar Begum." End quote. The festivities continued for more than 6 hours, and the dancing girls were granted 7,000 rupees at the Maharaja's orders by Raja Dhyan Singh. Amarnath also tells us that the gifts doled out to the bride included huge sums of money, elephants and horses, and countless precious objects, as well as almost all the jewels in the treasury except the Kohinoor. So the Maharaja not only elevated the status of a dancing girl and made her his queen and gave her the title of Gulbahar Begum, he also dealt with her two brothers in the same way, and they received immense favors from him and a new position that could, in Amarnath Akbari's words, could be equated to the Mirzas and Nawabs. And the term he uses here, sarcastically, is making them Rani Khans in the eyes of the public. As a result of this matrimonial alliance, the Muslim population, and this is again Amarnath Akbari, who states that the Muslim population in general felt a new surge of life run through them after almost 100 years. And even the most humble among them behaved as if they have surpassed Nawab Mu'in Mulk and started picking fights, making life difficult for everyone. So one of the brothers referred to here as Mirza remained under Dr. Honigberger's treatment, and that is where we find Dr. Honigberger referring to Gul Begum's wedding and treating her brother. So this person was treated for lunatic behavior after smoking too much charas and quarreling with his brother Nawab and sister Gul Begum over the property Ranjit Singh gave them. The doctor mentions that the Rani took him to live at the Lahore Fort to administer the medicine prescribed by him, and after a while meeting him there when he had fully recovered. Befitting the status of a Rani, the Maharaja appointed guards and attendants who, according to Amarnath, walked in front of the Begum's conveyance, carrying bare swords in their hands and angry expressions on their faces, clearing the way while announcing her arrival. The extent of her influence on the Maharaja can be gathered from Sohan Lal Suri's statement that due to her intervention, some prisoners were set free, and the Maharaja not only pardoned the crimes of Munshi Shiv Dayal's sons, but also fixed a huge amount of 100,000 rupees for them. After the wedding celebrations were over, the Maharaja appears to have taken his new bride on a tour that lasted at least a few months and included a visit to his ancestral home in Gujranwala. Suri reports that on the 6th of December 1832, the Maharaja marched from Ramnagar with Gul Begum by his side and reached Chota Ram's garden, and after this is now they're returning to Lahore. Chota Ram's garden 3 days later while it was raining. They both stayed in the garden for another 3 days, and finally, at about the third quarter of the day, rode an elephant along with the Begum and entered Lahore through the Masiti gate. And I quote Suri, "While he did that, he showered gold upon all residents, especially the needy and the poor," end quote, and reached the Hazuri Bagh, led by drum beaters, and also that a discharge of Topkhana took place to announce their arrivals. The Maharaja died on 27th June 1839, and Suri records that all the surviving ladies and Gul Begum, and I'm quoting Suri now, and Gul Begum wept very bitterly and fell senseless on the ground on account of their mental worry, end quote. 4 of the Maharaja's Rajput wives, including Raja Sansar Chand's daughter known as Rani Katochan, and 7 slaves formed Sati. Among the surviving were Rani Jinda, Dalip Singh's mother, Gul Begum, Rani Bhuri, Rani Devkal Khurd, which means Devkal the Junior, Rani Jirmat Bibi. Her name tells us that she may have been a Muslim, Rani Lakshmi, Rani Medan, Rani Mehtab Kaur, and Rani Roop Kaur. These names, except for the first one, are listed in the parliamentary papers in a table titled Returns of the Native Princes of India or Their Families. And according to this, Rani Gul Begum, as I mentioned earlier, was granted a sum of 12,380 rupees per annum for life, the highest amount of pension on annexation of Punjab paid to any of the other wives. Contemporary sources do not say much about the Rani's estates or property or her residence. Honigberger does mention that she took her brother to live at the fort to keep a vigil on him. So that means that she was living in the Lahore Fort, and most probably in the Sheesh Mahal, the apartments built on top of the Sheesh Mahal by the Maharaja. What we do know through these chronicles is that she lost her preeminent position after her husband's death, and her estates were forfeited, which is evident from the news published in the Punjab Akhbar of 29 September 1839. It informed, excuse me, the Punjab Akhbar informs us that Maharaja Kharak Singh ordered Mr. Ram Krishan to give 15,000 rupees per annum to Gul Begum in lieu of her forfeited estates. Her mansion in the city is mentioned in the last volume of Umdat-ut Tawarikh, where the Sikh seraglio was asked to shift out of their apartments in the Lahore Fort after Punjab's annexation. And to explain this, Suri notes that Sardar Budh Singh was ordered to, and I'm quoting Suri now, Sardar Budh Singh was ordered to establish the family of Kanwar Sher Singh along with his son in the mansion of Kunwar Nonihal Singh, and to give to every one of them all kinds of assurances and words of encouragement. First this, and then shortly afterwards, that Shahdev Singh and other members of the family of Sher Singh were put up in the mansions of Gul Begum. So that establishes the fact that she also had a Haveli in the walled city as well. It is to the accounts of late 19th century historians that we find reference of Gul Begum's garden and her tomb in Lahore, and the information that she built it during her lifetime and then left it to her adopted son Sardar Khan. The first account is in Tehqiqat-e-Chishti, published in 1867 by Nur Ahmad Chishti, who visited the garden in 1864, a year after the Rani's death. Another historian, 19th century historian, is Kanhaiya Lal, author of Tarikh-e-Lahore, published in 1884. He informs us that Gul Begum owned the largest jagir among Ranjit Singh's wives and gives important details about both the tomb and the garden. Another important source is Sayyid Muhammad Latif's Lahore, Its History, Architectural Remains and Antiquities, published in 1892. But this source is silent on the matter, and so is another publication of mid-20th century, Nukush, that otherwise gives brilliant sort of information on all monuments in Lahore. But for this, it just relies on Chishti's account and does not tell us anything new. Therefore, what we get to know is that this important and beautiful structure gradually faded into neglect, and to date, unfortunately, it is not included in the list of protected monuments of Lahore and is still considered a private property of the descendants of Sardar Khan and is not open to public. So now I will move the slide and take you to the tomb. This is the gateway of the tomb, which once stood in her garden, that in Kanhaiya Lal's words, and I quote, is grand and lush green and carries countless fruit trees and grape vines, end quote. Now it has lost its garden-like appearance and is situated next to a sizable and ancient Muslim graveyard, Miani Sahib. Most of Gul Begum's land presently serves the same purpose, but only for bearing descendants of the Rani's adopted son, Sardar, who of course, in his lifetime held property rights to it, and now his descendants have, and the property has been divided among several of his descendants. The extent of the area is therefore not known, as only fragments of its baked brick boundary wall seen by Chishti can be seen on the north side, with a double-storied building of the gateway on the west side that we now have on the slide. The Rani's tomb lies at the south end of the garden. Chishti mentions a large passage to the garden gateway that held a wooden fence lined by trees on the north side and a mud wall on the south that is now missing. Within this enclosure were a few structures, including a baked brick building with a veranda, and this is all from Chishti's account, a shelter for the cattle and horses, as well as a covered area for the Rani's carriage. There was also a well with an inscription on a marble tablet stating that, and I quote, "The owner of this well is Rani Gul Begum Sahiba, daughter of Sheikh Muhammad Akbar, wife of Ranjit Singh Bahadur Surbashi," end quote. It also used to have an enclosed pool, a washroom, a drinking area for cattle, a platform holding several clay flower pots. As joint property of several owners, the land lying right next to the western and southern boundary walls of Gul Begum's tomb today has all been built upon, leaving only a narrow passage in between. Houses on the east end are adjacent to the tomb wall extending northward, and the north side has the Miani Sahib graveyard stretched in front of it. Her tomb remains locked, and access to it by visitors and scholars is denied, as the key is said to be in possession of an absent relative. I had the good fortune of visiting it in 2006, but ever since then I've tried several times and have not succeeded. On the northwestern corner of the garden was a three-bayed old mosque with brick pillars on its eastern side that was renovated and whitewashed by the Rani during her last years. And this we learn from Chishti. This mosque ever since has been rebuilt, leaving almost no traces of its original shape, and appears to lie outside the northwestern boundary wall. So we don't know whether this was the mosque that the Rani herself had built, or was this, this happened to be there that at the time of this property coming under the Rani's control. Going back to Chishti's account, he also saw a platform on the eastern side of the mosque that held 7 graves, and he tells us that one was very old, while the ones next to it were of Rani's physicians, Hakim Karimullah, who died in 1845, and the rest were of her servants. So the gateway that we have now on the slide is a freestanding square structure, double-story in height with chamfered corners, and this is on the west side of the garden. The portal, flanked by low seats, is emphasized by a large multi-cusp archway that we have. I'm not sure if you can see the arrow, but this is the portal. The original wooden door that Chishti tells us about have now been replaced by an open-work wrought iron doors. The seats that were covered with chunam plaster and hurmachi, seen by Chishti, are now covered over with ordinary grey cement. These are the seats that I'm mentioning. The entire surface of the gateway was originally painted, but the only areas of decoration that remain are Now the soffit of the art above the entrance and the underside of the chhaja, or the eave in the top section of the facade. The spandrels of this archway and the area of the door lintel show faded traces of paint. Chishti records Persian verses to have been painted in 5 arched panels above the door lintel that are now missing without a trace. Each verse carries important information about persons attached to the garden, the date of laying out the garden, and the reason behind it. The central panel had 7 couplets painted in blue and reveal that Ali Bakhsh, a kind and benevolent person, laid the foundation, and Gul Begum's adopted son Sardar Khan is as famous as a Hatim, a legendary character famous for his generosity. The last of these 7 couplets mentions that the Rani laid out this garden for her leisurely walks. The rest of the 4 couplets given by Chishti were probably painted in panels flanking the central large one. One of these mentions Ghulam Ali as the mason and artisan. One is a eulogy claiming the garden to be an abode of countless nightingales. Another one gives a chronogram actually, and gives the lunar date of construction of the newly laid out garden as being 1856. So I'll move the slides now and I'll skip some information. When we come through the gateway into the garden, what we see on our left is a square enclosure with its small half-domed entrance in the south wall. This contains several graves. None have plaques giving names and dates. And opposite this is a rectangular domed pavilion built on a platform that serves as Gul Begum's tomb. The facade has 5 arched openings. 2 doorways at the ends have wooden double doors, and the central 3 are now blocked with part open brickwork and part solid. Placed in the cornice above the central arch, probably a later addition in a small marble plaque with black inlaid Persian inscription. This one is, this mentions Sardar Khan, Gul Begum's son, as the builder, and it gives us the date 1855-56. And if you can read Persian, it says, Bar zameen taza chum bahisht barin. Bahisht barin, of course, is similar to paradise. Bagh ba abutab Gul Begum. And I'll go back to the facade now. The plastered and painted facade has an engaged column at each end decorated with different designs and stucco relief. The cornice of the facade is divided into panels of different widths, decorated with fruit dishes and flowers, running along the underside of the projecting eave or chhaja, in a continuous band of cartouches formed with strap work that contains vases and fruit dishes alternatively. The parapet has the mudakhil pattern, this one, repeated in convex and concave, and a segmented burji in each of the 4 corners. The central raised section of the pavilion is crowned by a large segmented Chokhandi type dome with only 1 colors of its finial now surviving. The interior of the pavilion is divided into 3 distinct sections. This is the central section that we have on the screen, and if you can see my arrow, this one is leading to the side, one on each side, smaller sections. These 2 rooms are sparsely painted as compared to the profusely decorated main hall, but nevertheless have designs mostly in khatkashi or outline on a white background. The main hall that we have in front of us is divided, as I said, in 3 sections. The central rectangular room is where the tomb is right in the center. The side sections have coved ceilings with an all-over decoration of octagonal stars connected by small sunflower medallions, and these have mirrors in their center. And the central vaulted room has a large central medallion exquisitely rendered with radiating cartouches enclosing flowers. And directly underneath the medallion, of course, as we just saw, is a white marble cenotaph placed on a platform faced with black marble. The orientation of this cenotaph is north-south, as is usual for a Muslim grave, but two other features of this room are unusual. The entrance to a tomb is usually in the south wall, and the west wall indicates the Qibla direction, but here the entrance is through the north side, and a sunken niche is in the center of the south wall. This one. Elaborately painted in white, blue, and red, this niche has a slightly projecting platform at its base, again making it different from the usual Qibla niche. Not deep enough for the chair, it may have been used for placing an object of importance. And keeping this information in view, as well as the overall orientation of the tomb and the block of the three central arches wall, as we saw on the facade, it appears probable that initially the structure was used as a pleasure pavilion and was turned into a tomb at a later date. The selection of motifs for the exterior and interior also shows that the Rani planned it to serve both purposes. One interesting feature of the fruit and flower designs painted all over the interior of this tomb is the frequent use of the mango fruit. It starts on the exterior wall, shown in oversized chinaware pots placed on tables with smaller mangoes scattered around them on either side of the marble block. Upon entering the tomb through its westward door, the first painted panel on the south wall opposite the entrance is this panel we have on the screen, a visitor encounters. The entire length and breadth of the arched blind niche of this rectangular section is painted with a tree laden with fruit. The lower section has lost its plaster as well as the paint, but the upper area is extant. Most of the smaller panels in the rest of the tomb, including cartouches on the soffits of the squat arches dividing the main hall into three sections, also have the mango fruit placed in dishes, flanking a vase, or heaped up in bowls. Wall paintings in Rani Gulbahar Begum's tomb are among the best examples of the very few surviving Sikh period frescoes. Commissioned by the Rani, they are specimens of excellent draftsmanship and appear to have been executed by the best available artists. Their finesse is comparable to other Royal Commission works in Lahore, like the main hall of each Mahal in Lahore Fort, Noy King's Haveli again in Lahore, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Samadhi opposite the fort. Gul Begum's tomb paintings are also significant because they are datable. They present a well laid out ornamental program and were in their original form without ever having retouched when I photographed them in 2006 and 2007. In their state of neglect, they call out for immediate preservation, as termite and moisture, as we can see on these slides, have already damaged, and one doesn't really know their state at present because access now is denied. Especially, and the damaged state, of course, is in the lower section of the main hall and the two rooms at both ends. So going back to why Gul Begum may have chosen this image to occupy such an important position in the tomb or her pleasure pavilion before the pavilion was turned into a tomb, is I will try to explain it by looking at its symbolism. A predilection for mango decoration connects this tomb to a large pavilion built on top of the Sheesh Mahal of the Lahore Fort that was used as residence by the Maharaja and his seraglio. Here, the most eye-catching motif is on the wall opposite the entrance. The central large arched blind niche, now in front of us, covering the entire height of the wall, is painted with a mango tree laden with fruit. A few parrots are shown in flight and some perched on its branches, pecking at the mangoes, while 4 squirrels appear to be jumping on the trunk. Although by a mediocre hand and different in quality from the mango trees painted in the tomb, the similarity of the subject matter and composition is striking. And from Honigberger's accounts, we learn, as I've already mentioned, that Rani Gul Begum resided in the fort, and the presence of this wall painting strongly suggests that this pavilion may have belonged to her. The rest of the walls are divided into smaller niches that have flowers and birds painted in them on a white background, similar to the 2 small side rooms of the tomb. It appears that Gul Begum had the mango tree painted in her garden pavilion as a reminder of her days with the Maharaja in the fort, but here she deliberately restricted the repertory to floral and fruit designs in the tomb, of course, with the future of the building in mind. The absence of parrots or any other animate imagery in the tomb is not difficult to comprehend, as Islam prohibits representation of living creatures. As a pleasure pavilion, the interior space decorated with vegetal motifs connected it to the lush green landscape in front of it, and when it was turned into a tomb, the same repertory became an attempt of imagining Jannat or heaven for the deceased, the verdant land of abundance and bliss promised to every devout Muslim. In the secular sense, mangoes are a fertility symbol used for thousands of years in the subcontinent. They were held sacred by the Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. 5 leaves of the mango tree besmeared with sindoor or vermilion is called Amar Pallava and is placed in a pot called a Lakshmi Ghata and are a common sight in Hindu ceremonies. The mango tree is the tree of Kamadeva, the god of love, who shot his arrow tipped with flowers, meditating Shiva, who upon opening his eyes instantly fell in love with Parvati. Associated with fertility and good luck, mangoes were found on doorways to announce the sun and are still used in Hindu marriage pandals or venues. The presence of mango trees in Gul Begum's tomb and possibly her residential apartments speak volumes about contemporary cultural and religious practices. It tells us that the Sikh Maharaja's secular policies were not only for the public and not his alone. His favorite queen shared his life remaining a Muslim and possibly expressed her silent wish to hang mango leaf festoons on her doorway, but settled with having mango trees painted in the privacy of her worldly and eternal abodes. Thank you. This is just a slide of one of the side rooms, and I'll thank you. I'm happy to get questions.
Thank you, Dr. Nadhra Khan, for that enlightening presentation. Just before as we invite people to ask questions, I'd just like to put a reminder out there that please send your questions to our question panel with your name and city. And if you'd like to verbally ask your question, please confirm that you do have a microphone on the side. I think we have our first question by Geeta Kaur. I invite her to write her question down on the question panel She had her hand raised, and if not, I can also unmute you if you send me a little message confirming that you do have a microphone. We also have a question from Inikor. She's from Connecticut, United States, and her question is, could you please, Dr. Nadhra Khan, could you tell us about the Silver Bungalow?
Oh, yes. So the Silver Bungalow was a double-storied structure, and we find Sohan Lal Suri mentioning the Silver Bungalow several times. And what I recently found in British papers is that when the British found it, of course, in the Tosha Khana in the Lahore Fort, they thought that this was of no significance. And unfortunately, and I was shocked to learn about it, to read about it, that they sold it as old silver. So the Silver Bungalow that was double-storied in high, it was a double-storied silver-covered structure, and it used to be put up in Hazuri Bagh, Baradari. We mentioned that on the Sera festivities, the Maharaja would, of course, enter the Silver Bungalow, go to the first floor, have his gold and silver chairs put up there, and several times when the British officers were visiting him, the Silver Bungalow would be taken out of the Lahore Fort and placed in several, locations. And such a wonderful a novelty was melted down, and the silver sold as, and these are the words that that are mentioned, that this has no worth but to be sold as old silver. For I guess I think I have it somewhere. I can dig it up and give you the amount that this Silver Bungalow was meant to fetch. I am going to take it out, and just 1 second. No, I can't find. But Inni, I will, of course, send you the reference as well as the money that thought was the Silver Bungalow was worth, which was, I don't, as far as I remember, if I'm not wrong, wasn't more than 13,000 rupees.
Very well. Thank you, Dr. Nadhra Khan. Inukorji says thank you. We do have another question from Arjit Mahal. This question is, we know what happened to some of the main princes, sons of the Maharaja. Are there any known descendants of the 22 Rani'S? This is Arjit Mahal from New Jersey.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with any of this. What I did find interesting in the residents, of course, and the political diaries written by the residents, and I've asked a few scholars about it, where Henry Lawrence talks about one of Sher Singh's sons named Khurram Singh, that I've never sort of come across in any other references.
And Khurram Singh.
But other than that, I'm not familiar with that sort of part of history. I'm sorry.
Thank you. We do have another question from Inikor from Connecticut. Why are these buildings not allowed access to now?
Hi, Annie. So I've found the reference So it states that the silver bungalow, which is of the size of a large summer house, and I'm quoting this from the British documents, and is hardly likely to sell for anything but its value as old silver, estimated at 35,000 rupees, and we presume that this article has no value as a subject of curiosity. Therefore, it should be sold, end quote. And now to your second question. Well, this particular tomb, as I said, the government has not laid any claim to it. There is very little awareness about it. I learned about it through, sort of indirect sources, and I went there in 2007, and I was lucky to have access to it, and I took these photographs. And later, when I wanted to revisit and take measurements and do a detailed study, the descendants who have their houses now built, of course, right next to the gateway that I showed in my one of the first slides, made me knock at every door and ask to be allowed to enter the tomb, and they did not. Each one of them told me that the key was with another relative, and it was raining, and I was feeling miserable, walking from one door, knocking, begging for them to let me enter. I just wanted to take measurements and take a few more pictures so I could, draw a plan and sort of document it in a better way. But they did not allow me to do that. Later, I tried sending a few of my students to do the same, and the same thing happened. I don't know how to sort of cross this barrier, but I do understand if in 2007 the state of the walls and the wall paintings was in such a sort of damaged, they were already damaged and the plaster had been lost. I wonder what it looks like today.
Right on. We do have a few more questions, Dr. Nadhra Khan. Another one we have is from Inderpreet Singh from Princeton, New Jersey. His question is, what can we do to improve the condition of these kind of historical buildings to protect our heritage for the future? Another related question was, is there any policies being undertaken by the government of Pakistan to preserve? So I'm just putting these two questions together.
Generally, since this was private property and it is still considered to be private property, it does not come under the Wallace Trust Property Board jurisdiction. The rest of the properties, including the Gurdwaras and shrines, of course, comes under the Wallace Trust Property Board, and they are taken care of. The rest, of course, the secular buildings come under some come under the archaeology department. They're also, most of them are being taken care of. But going back to your first question, I encourage people like you to come and visit these buildings. I think that is the most effective way of making not only the government, but people who live around them and people who have access to them realize that these are important buildings and people are interested in them. And that would, of course, again, not only generate interest among other people, and the rest of the world will get to know about them, but the locals would also start understanding how significant they are for the rest of the world.
So just to clarify, Dr. Nadhra Khan, did you say that most of these properties are under private holdings, but
no,
they might be
open? Just this one. Just this one.
Of course, thank you. And I think that is it for the questions for now. I also do have one question, if you could indulge me, but I do recognize that we are over time, so we'll, my question is how, you did mention earlier in the presentation that it was frowned upon when Maharaja Ranjit Singh was, either using henna, and there were he was advised to cover his hands, or
Yes.
tone
When he visited the
some of
Golden
his
Temple, yes.
Golden Temple, right? And I'm assuming that there would be other political advisors as well advising him not to do certain things. And so my question is, what were some of his arguments or some of the ways that he, responded to those criticisms by the political or religious advisors around him at that time? And how can we bring that today as well in the present context to be more secular?
So I've been studying Umdatut Tawarikh and several other sort of first-hand sources or eyewitness accounts. What we learn is Suri does not actually give us too much of that, so it's difficult to understand that. But what we do understand is that the Maharaja tried to engage with such criticisms from a perspective where he would, what he thought was right was probably in some cases different to what other people were thinking around him. But then he always found a way of going around it. We in sort of in present times can imagine that the Maharaja must have been dissuaded by a lot of those associates in doing something like this. He nevertheless went ahead. He did it in Amritsar, and then he went the next day. He went to the Darbar Sahib as well. So there are, sometimes Suri gives us an insight into what the Maharaja thought of some of the people. And one very interesting instance is where the Maharaja was, he used to dole out a lot of offerings to Hindu priests, and he also used to give a lot of money to Muslim shrines and offer patronage to all types of religious monuments or shrines in Lahore and Amritsar. And once he was talking, and Suri records this, and once he was talking to Suri and asked him why had Suri become, his court chronicler. And Suri sort of in his, of course, we need to take into we need to also consider that Suri himself is writing this, so he's, trying to project himself in a certain way. And Suri said something to the effect that I'm interested in this. And the Maharaja corrected him, saying that no, you should have actually said that you do it for me instead of giving me an objective answer. So the Maharaja appears to be a very intelligent and informed person, and at times he chose to ignore certain things that he thought were not according to what he wanted things to be. And I mean, I can sort of look up more instances similar to this, but right now I can't think of. I'm sorry, I can't think of anything else.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you, Dr. Nadhra Khan, because I think it is important for us to maybe pick on some of those things about how a secular Maharaja, like Maharaja Ranjit Singh, was able to stand his holding amongst criticisms around his time, and what can we learn from it today. So,
yes, I mean, the best thing that I have found about this is that the Maharaja would bow down to these criticisms. I mean, he confront any of this. The instance of sort of marrying Mora is again where he was, probably again punished by the bhais at the Darbar Sahib, and he very happily accepted it. And after marrying Gul Begum, he again tried to appease them. So he's not trying to sort of project himself as a person who is above the law. He accepted it, tried to, please them in his own way, and they also realized that, being in a position that he was, it was great of him to understand what he was supposed to do, and then yet again he was trying to again set up a precedent or set an example of how he could bridge this gap between different religious groups. Marrying a Muslim woman of a lower status, assigning a title to her, giving her property, and then elevating her status is something which was not a small thing in his times. There must have been criticism. There must have been criticism from within the inner circles of senior officials in the Lahore Fort, and of course his own wives. We know that he was already married to Sansar Chand's daughters, the one that is referred to as Rani Katojan, how she may have reacted to it. Again, we do not, Sohan Lal Suri and Zafarnama Ranjit Singh by Amarnath are silent on this, and so are the British officers visiting the fort, because they did not have access to the inner circles of the Zanana or the harem. But from the Maharaja's actions, we can understand that he did not really care for these religious or social divides, and he tried to bridge these by several actions. And again, you're right, we need to pick out more such details and build a case for it.
Sure. And that's the interesting piece of this history over here. Well, to honor our time today, I'd just like to, in closing, thank you for everyone for joining into our webinar, and my apologies to those whose questions may not have been answered due to time constraints. You're more than welcome to ask us those questions on our Twitter handle or Facebook page of SICRI, and we will post your replies. Thank you, Dr. Nadhra Khan, for presenting this unknown piece of history and how it informs us about times where people did do things that even today may seem as actions of great critique or woe. And I think it comes in at a very good time in our contemporary time period as well. So thank you for taking out time to share your thoughts and your research with us today. To everyone else, thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Everyone else attending, please be reminded that these webinars are provided for free, but there is a cost associated with this technology and administration. If you feel you have benefited from this particular webinar or others in the past, please consider making a donation to SICRI or becoming a webinar sponsor. More details can be obtained in the follow-up email you will receive or by emailing info@sicri.org. A reminder, everyone, please wait a few seconds for the link to appear on follow-up survey. Your feedback is extremely important to Sikh Research Institute, and we appreciate your time. To offer our closing comments, I'd like to open up the panel to Dr. Nadhra Khan again to say a few closing words, and I thank everyone for the e-Sangat today for the webinar. On to you, Dr. Nadhra Khan.
Thank you, Vineet. Thank you very much. Thank you, Inni, for introducing me to SICRI, and to Kiran, with whom I've been communicating. It was a pleasure to be here. I hope my talk and my, the slides that I showed you were of interest to you, and you found my talk interesting, I'd be happy to answer any more questions over emails if you like that. You can get my email address from Vineet. And thank you for giving me this opportunity of sharing my work with you, which is ongoing, which is, it gives me great pleasure to present it and to learn more about Sikh architectural decoration and Sikh Maharaja himself. Thank you.